Hey, it's Kyle here. Today I'll be reviewing The Devil in the White City by Erik Larson. This is not a first-time read for me. Read this book several years ago. It's one of my favorite nonfiction books. But I hadn't read it recently, so I thought it was time for a reread. So this review will be a little bit different because it is something I've read a couple of times, so it's not coming at it from a first-time reader. I will say after reading it again for the first time in several years, I still absolutely love this book. I'm a huge fan of Erik Larson. He is one of my favorite nonfiction writers. I've read several of his books. I've really enjoyed them all. I've always said in the past that Devil in the White City was my favorite of his books. And after a reread, I think that is still the case. And that's not always the case when you read a book. A lot of times, especially if it's been a few years, you go like, all right, I still enjoy it, but maybe there's parts of the book I don't really quite get into as much more. I don't find it quite as interesting. Or in the case of a nonfiction book, a lot of times the part of it that's entertaining is you learning new facts and how that intrigues you as you learn more about the subject matter. And sometimes when you reread a nonfiction book the second time, now that you know this stuff, it's just not quite as interesting to read. And I think one thing that Erik Larson does great, which makes his books very rereadable, is even though they're nonfiction history books, he's able to set them up in such a way and write them in such a style that it feels like you're reading a novel. It feels more like a story that just happens to be true. He is so talented at doing that. If you're not familiar with The Devil in the White City, it kind of covers a period in Chicago around the World's Fair that was held there in 1893. Half the book looks at Daniel Burnham, who was the leader of designing and planning the World's Fair, and all the people involved in pulling off this World's Fair, which has a tremendous impact on society, on Chicago, on the country, and really in the world. It's utterly fascinating. This book could be completely just about that, and it would be a great book. The second half of this book explores while this amazing thing is happening in the World's Fair. At the same time in Chicago, you have Dr. Holmes, who really becomes, although there are probably other people had committed multiple murders in the U.S. before, he really becomes known as like America's first serial killer, America's first psychopath. One of the worst killers, human beings, however you want to phrase it, who has ever lived. We have no idea how many people he's killed. Good chance it's in double digits. It could be high double digits. We just don't know. He is the worst of the worst. And the exploration of this evil person who was lurking in Chicago, luring victims, primarily young, vulnerable females who were coming to Chicago by themselves to try to make a life for themselves. And they meet this attractive doctor who basically brings them into his world. They're mesmerized, and before they know it, they're dead. And he's usually found a way to make money off their death. This part of the book is utterly fascinating. So that's when you combine these two storylines, and it makes such a fascinating book. I don't want to get too much in the details behind Dr. Holmes, because I think some ways, if you've never read this book, learning that stuff firsthand is both fascinating and repulsive at the same time, but still makes a very interesting read. And same with the World's Fair. How this World's Fair is pulled off is mind-blowing. I work in local government. Part of my job is, like, a lot of times I manage events. Small scale events, nothing like a World's Fair. So I have a kind of a basic concept of what goes into planning an event. How they pulled off this World's Fair that's ginormous is by far maybe the biggest event that had ever been held in the world for entertainment purposes. In a short amount of time, all the amazing firsts this World's Fair featured everything from stuff like a Ferris wheel to products that debuted there like Pabst Blue Ribbon, Cracker Jacks, all sorts of types of entertainment were introduced to the public, architectural style, just how people would have fun. So if you know the story of Walt Disney, you might even know this, but in a lot of ways this World's Fair in Chicago kind of inspired him to actually create the Disney parks and wanting to recreate that magic that this World's Fair had in Chicago. This is an amazing book. Highly recommend it. If you love nonfiction, if you've never read The Devil in the White City, you'll love this. Again, one thing I want to stress a lot, Erik Larson writes nonfiction in such a way that it feels more like you're reading a story. So if you typically do not enjoy nonfiction, you're more of a novel reader, you like reading fiction, this is a nonfiction book you might actually enjoy. If you like true crime podcasts or documentaries on Netflix, because of the Dr. Holmes aspect of this, I think you'll really love this book. A lot of times a book, be it nonfiction or fiction, will have a very narrow area of interest. And so if you're into this one specific area of interest, you might love the book. And this, I think, is probably true for TV shows and movies and stuff as well. But if you're not into this one thing, you really want to enjoy it. I think The Devil in the White City bucks this trend. And you can be into a lot of different things, enjoy a lot of different things, and still find this book fascinating. So I highly, highly, highly recommend The Devil in the White City by Erik Larson. If you've never read it before, please check it out. If you read it before, maybe it's been a few years, do what I did. Do a reread. I think you'll enjoy it as much as you did the first time. So hope you enjoyed this review. Let me know in the comment section below, what is your favorite nonfiction book you've ever read and why? Thanks for watching. If you like this video, please hit that like button. If you haven't yet, please subscribe to the channel. I really appreciate the support. Thanks for watching. I'll see you the next time, and happy reading.